Who do I think may have done it? And I'm just theorizing. The wife. And if she didn't do it, she may have at least set him up. But it's tough to see a man relaxed in his recliner, watching a game, no forced entry, and overkill, and not think that the wife is the top suspect.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. Returning guest, been on our show many times, and when he does, it's always an exciting and good interview. Welcome back, King of Connecticut. King, how are you?
Thank you, brother. And I think we have a topic today that really combines all of our past shows, combining the mob life and the wild and wacky world of professional wrestling. Man, I'm excited about this one. Dino Bravo.
And it definitely combines everything that crime and entertainment is a part of here. So we kind of cover all these aspects. Dino Bravo. So when I was young, I remember Dino coming in. He had the blonde hair, the strong man, world's strongest man, Dino Bravo. For a period of time, he had a manager by the name of Frenchie Martin. Later on, he would go to Jimmy Hart. But that's how I remembered him. What's a little bit on Dino's background, King, if you will, to kind of lay some groundwork here before we get into the meat of the show?
Well, I think to look at Dino Bravo's background, you have to start with his family. And his uncle was mob boss Vic Cotroni. Now, Vic came from Calabria to Montreal. And my own family history, they came from Sicily, from Agrigento to Montreal, and then to the United States, to the Boston area. And there's a difference there. And this is something that I think a lot of these mob shows don't address and don't look into the historical aspects. I mean, you really have three major criminal organizations coming from Italy. You have starting in Naples as you work your way south. You have the Camorra in Naples, and then you have the Andreggiata in Calabria, where Vic Cotroni came from, and then you have what's called the Mafia in Sicily, always mispronounced. Mafia is the name, and the name comes from a fable, and the fable goes back to the French occupation. Now, Sicily is an island that was a conquering route. It was conquered by the Romans. It was conquered by the French. It was conquered by the Arabs, by the Moors, by the Greeks, even by the Vikings. And during the French occupation, this fable, which is probably an amalgamation of all the occupations, and the way that the fable goes is that you always had this underground society in Sicily because you had to, because of the occupation. And one of the Frenchmen had beaten and raped a Sicilian woman, which is something that was probably rather commonplace during these occupations. And one of the members of this underground society, who happened to be the grandfather of this girl, his daughter approached him, and he beheaded the rapist, put his head on a stick, and rode through the village on the horse screaming "Mafia, Mafia," which in Sicilian dialect means my daughter, getting vengeance for his daughter and for the rape and death of his granddaughter. So that's just a little bit of historical background, but back to Vic Cotroni. He was from that Androgynous background, which is oozes machismo. You know, Sicilians were very masculine, but they took it to a whole nother level to where if they wanted the woman, they took the woman. And in Vic Cotroni's case, that meant brutalizing and raping a gal by the name of Maria Brusciano. And um, her, she was the aunt of Adolfo Brusciano, who is Dino Bravo. And Vic Cotroni was a mob boss in Montreal, and he and his brother were professional wrestlers, and he went under the name Vic Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
And he used that powerful professional wrestling persona. Of course, at that time, you had to be really tough and rugged just to make it into the world of professional wrestling. And he used that to intimidate in his capacity in prohibition. They were really big in booze, in the booze business, in the drug business, and in prostitution. And Dino Bravo, his nephew, worked for him as an enforcer on the street, but also with Vic Vincent, the mob boss, being professional wrestler. He took that name, Vic Vincent, his ring name, to the streets. And Dino Bravo became a professional wrestler, and they ran the promotion in Montreal. And Vic Cotroni was the money backer, and Dino Bravo was the babyface superstar. And they were a very successful territory. And then any professional wrestling fans know what happened when Vince McMahon took over the territories. You know, he bought them out, and Dino had this lavish lifestyle. And so he came into the WWF, as you remember, with Frenchie Martin, you know, the famous bench press record with Jesse Ventura. That was another thing he was noted for. They played up on his French heritage, and Vince did something that he often does with folks who come in from other territories. Again, Dino Bravo was the champion of the Montreal territory. He ran the Montreal territory. It was funded by his mob boss uncle, and he sort of castrates them. Vince McMahon, and he castrated Dino Bravo, made him bleach his hair. This proud Italian with a beautiful black pompadour had to bleach his hair blonde and play up being French, do jobs in Montreal to people, lose to people, and be a heel, not able to exercise his great technical wrestling prowess, just be this heel character and sort of a goofball character, similar to the Rougeau brothers, who came in from their own territory and had to be goofballs, the all-American boys. Folks remember that.
And the Mountie too. A Mountie was another.
Mountie.
Yeah.
I'm the Mountie. Yeah, absolutely. So his run in WWF ends. And just kind of to summarize, he was living high off the hog, had a lavish lifestyle. His career ends. And what happens? What happens, Hollywood? He needs to keep that lifestyle going. He's got this mansion, these cars, and how can he do that, right? There's no pension there. There's no severance. He goes back to work for the family business for his uncle. And he felt like he was very much insulated, right? Because his uncle protected would be the word, right? Because his uncle was the boss, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he got careless, and he was involved in cigarette smuggling, which is very lucrative because the tax on cigarettes, so expensive in Canada, and he's smuggling cigarettes from the United States right into Canada. And what happens? He's not kicking up. He's going on these Indian reservations that they ask him not to go on to, using his fame. And he's essentially becoming at odds with the family, right? But he feels like, I'm protected because my uncle is Vic Cotroni, right? And if you watch Vic Cotroni will tell you, I just make the pepperoni for the pizza. When they interviewed Vic Cotroni and asked him if he was mob involved, but his uncle in reality is a very powerful mob boss, and he feels like he's protected. Well,
I just want to hop in real quick. That was an interesting little tidbit of how he did find the Indians and use I guess they controlled the river and the water area, and they were big wrestling fans, and so he used that kind of in order to transport the cigarettes. And a little bit later on, and I'm sure you were probably going to touch on this, but I'll just I think it leads, everybody knows the way the mob works is you do what you do, you make your money, and then you kick up. There's that famous saying in Sopranos, money goes down, or money goes up, shit goes downhill. So whenever he was doing this, they actually started running coke on those routes as well. Because cigarettes were going without a hitch, and so they started doing coke.
Yeah, so they started too much money not to, so they started getting involved in running the cocaine. And what happened that supposedly led to Dino Bravo's demise was he was getting too cocky. He was doing this work with the casinos and the Indian reservations that they had told him not to. He was going out on his own. He felt like he was protected ultimately by his uncle being the boss. Well, his uncle passes away, right? Vic Cotroni passes away. And not long after that, there's a shipment of cigarettes and cocaine that Dino Bravo was supposed to be overseeing and moving. Okay. The warehouse is owned by some made guys up there, and he doesn't move the shipment like he's supposed to. The warehouse gets raided, and these guys are busted. Dino's not busted. What does that lead people to think? And I'll ask you, Hollywood. I mean, it's pretty obvious for the fans listening. What does that lead people to think?
Yeah, if something you're involved in, if it goes down and everybody gets pinched, but you don't, that's going to have people, looking at you, obviously, as you're the ones that led them to it. And there's been a lot of the research that I've done in prep for this. It was kind of like there was a lot of finger pointing at each other, but Dino was like, his job was to get it to the warehouse. The other guy waited 3 days before they tried to move it. And then when they came to move it, then it was raided and they were taken down. Still could be that Dino, possibly tipped him off. But either way, Dino was ultimately held responsible. And you see that a lot throughout history of organized crime. That's why it's so important to kind of know who you're dealing with, because if you get a load taken or a load seized or anything like that, you're going to be held responsible for making that right. It happened in the movie The Irishman, with Danny Green, and it's happened a lot throughout time. So they were looking at Dino, and I want to say this load was probably worth close to about $400,000 altogether. So it was a lot, and he was going to take the heat for that. So you have, either way, it's not good for him, because he's either looked at as he could possibly have ratted this whole thing out, and even if he didn't rat it out, he's still responsible for it. So it's not a good situation he's in.
Yeah, so that's the story of how he was murdered. And I want to get into now, as we kind of wind down, is specifically what happened.
Mm-hmm.
He was in his mansion, in his estate. He was lounging on his recliner, watching a hockey game, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And he was shot in the head 7 times, in the body 9 times. Overkill.
Wait.
Right? There were no signs of forced entry whatsoever. Right? So let me ask you, Hollywood, when a man is murdered, who typically is the number one suspect?
It's usually the spouse or significant other, whoever lives in the house, the relationship wise. That's typically who you look for. If it's the husband is dead, they're going to look for the wife. If it's the wife's dead, they're going to look for the husband. If for nothing else, just to eliminate them and then start searching for whoever else. But that's usually the first person that they go to.
Yeah. Now, how was he killed? He was
He's
killed again. No forced entry. He's on his recliner, and it's overkill. It's personal.
yeah,
Shot
very
7 times in the head, 9 times in the body. Who found him?
wife.
The wife. So, who do I think may have done it? And I'm just theorizing.
Mhm.
The wife. And if she didn't do it, she may have at least set him up. But it's tough to see a man relaxed in his recliner, watching a game, no forced entry, and overkill, and not think that the wife is the top suspect, especially when she finds the body and claims she was out with her daughter at a hockey game.
Mhm.
So no one's ever said that before, and I just want to say it. And I also want to say that in researching it, Dino Bravo's was a mob marriage. His wife was also connected and from a connected family.
Mhm.
So I'm just theorizing based on what we know that the wife may have either set him up or pulled the trigger.
Now, you did read that there was actually two different caliber handguns found, and some people have theorized. I think I've seen on Scott Bernstein's podcast that possibly this was done to throw off detectives or law enforcement. It could have been one guy that used both. As you said, once you do 6 or 7 shots in the head, you could take out another gun and do the shots all in the body. But I mean, definitely when you look at those things, when you someone's in a relaxed state, I think someone like you, myself, if we're in a tense situation and shit goes off the rails, we're not going to be sitting back relaxed in our recliner. So
Exactly.
whoever it was, he knew. I don't think there's a doubt about that. Whether it was a mob associate or whoever, he had to know them. He had to feel comfortable with them, and they were probably there for a long period of time. And then that gets to one where it very well could have been the wife.
Yeah. Let,
And
let's rewind. Let's rewind a little, Hollywood. Um, okay, and that's an interesting point you made. Maybe it was another mob associate, but given what we just talked about and what had just happened with this shipment,
mm,
he wouldn't have been comfortable lounging at home with another mob associate. He would
that's
have
that's my
he
thing.
would he would be looking over his shoulder. And that's why I feel strongly that the wife was involved here.
Because there was reports that he reached out to a few people, former wrestlers, and alluded to the fact that his days might have been numbered. And so that's a great point that you bring up, because I think anybody with any kind of sense knows if you think your days are numbered, if you're calling people and telling them, anybody that knows about this business and this lifestyle, they don't typically send enemies to do the job. Who do they
Of
send?
course not. No, they're going to send your friends from the life.
Yeah.
So if he's not going to be kicking back. He's going to be on edge unless it's a quiet evening at home with the missus.
Mhm.
And let's talk about Montreal. Okay, uh, Vic Cotroni was very powerful in the city of Montreal. That mob family and the Rizzutos were extremely powerful in Montreal in controlling law enforcement.
Mhm.
So, based on everything that I've studied and read about this murder, it wasn't investigated too heavily. It
No.
was, yeah. So I think again, it's just a theory I have, but I think it's a very plausible theory.
Yeah. I think there was enough money spread around up there to, if there was anything of merit, it was quickly either overlooked, maybe brushed away or swept under the rug, so to speak. And I'm like you 100%. I don't think it was investigated very good. There was also, I don't know if you looked this deep into it, and I like to give credit because I do a lot of my research from other podcast shows. I think it was Scott Bernstein's as well, where there was two other murders of guys that were associated with smuggling and organized crime in the same neighborhood. One was like, I think a couple houses away, like on the next street that had happened. And this was not a neighbor. This wasn't the hood, folks. I want to make this clear. This was a nice neighborhood. I think Dino spent about $1 million on this house. And that was a lot of what got him to be in these issues. I mean, if he made $1 million, he spent $1 million. So by that rational, if you look, you got a big house, but you're also broke. And that's
Yeah,
kind of
that's a good, so true. And it's really not what you make, it's what you spend. And how many ex athletes that could have retired comfortably are broke now because they didn't manage their money. And he had this lavish lifestyle, the mansion and all. And yeah, I had heard that about the other murders on the street. But again, yeah, just to reiterate again, I'm aware of the killings in the area, but once again, and I moved to my recliner here because my phone overheated out in the pool screen house. But just like I'm doing now, Dino was kicking back, relaxing in his recliner. There was no sign of forced entry. He wasn't looking over his shoulder, especially after what had just transpired. And it was emotional. And that's what all investigators look at when they look at a killing of this sort. It was overkill. If you are a hitman and you're going to come here into my home and take me out, you're lucky enough to sneak in and catch me in my recliner, you're going to come here and you're going to put one behind the ear. Mm-hmm. You're not going to shoot me 7 times in the face, 9 times in the body. This was overkill. And I feel very strongly that whether she was the shooter, which she may have been, or otherwise, that his wife was involved. And again, to reiterate the power that the crime family had in Montreal, the police looked the other way and didn't really investigate this. But if they had investigated it deeply, they would have looked at her very closely.
Well, and if you watch The Dark Side of the Ring too, his wife was part of that. And when it got to the point to where they asked, did you want to talk about anything that you've seen? Her response was she didn't want to talk about it. And so sometimes it's almost like the Ockman's razor, sometimes the simplest answer is the truth. If you can't find anything, if you couldn't find anything outside, you can't find tire tracks or you can't find footprints, nobody's seen anybody coming and going. It's not going to be very, I guess, eye catching for a wife to be in and out of a house or a husband to be in and out of the house. If you don't have anything of, that jumps off the page of anybody else doing it, that's definitely a plausible scenario of what you're talking about. Cause who knows what old Dino might've been doing outside of the, just the smuggling and whatnot. You're making that kind of money. You're no doubt doing some partying, brother, for sure.
Oh, absolutely, man. And if it looks like the spouse and it smells like the spouse, chances are it's the spouse. And if you talk to any investigators, they're going to tell you the same thing.
Well, I think it's a fresh take on this. A lot of people have covered it, but nobody's really covered, this angle, this aspect. And I think what really helps drive it home is what you said. If Dino's reaching out to people, Rick Martel and other people, telling him that his days could possibly be numbered, even if it's a friend, you've got to know that a lot of times that's who they would send to take care of business. So in that rationale, why would you even be comfortable enough to be in a relaxed position, even if it's a friend? Now, who would you be? I'm in my recliner all the time. Who's walking around behind me? My wife.
Is your wife. Absolutely. And that's the reality of it, man. And I mean, the facts here speak for themselves. It may well have been, someone from within their crime family, but if it was, and they may well have been planning it, but if they did, the circumstances will look a lot different than a man lounging at home with no footprints in the snow, no signs of forced entry. I mean, this all points to the wife.
And too, you have to look at it, even if she wasn't, someone that was doing the trigger. What if she, okay, at 4:30, I'm just spitballing a time. You need to make sure that door's unlocked. That way I can
Yeah,
walk in. And,
absolutely.
doesn't necessarily mean to be that she was a person to pull the trigger, but complicit in some way, which would be, would lay some groundwork as to why there was no forced entry. Maybe
And
he never saw it coming.
and I would go one step further. With all that going on, he's going to make damn sure his door is locked. So someone had to leave that door unlocked. And with all that going on, I got a Derringer right over here to the right of me. When I'm sitting in my own lounger, my own recliner, he's going to be ready. And
Oh,
he was just chilling at home, and that means to me that means he was chilling at home with the wifey.
and we'll wind it up too. They did find, I think, about $50,000 in cash and some cigarettes in a closet. I think it was in the house after they did do some research in there. So no doubt he was involved. No doubt. I think he was probably looked at as responsible for that. As far as who it was, we may never know. I mean, it's been over 30 years. The case is technically still open. I don't know about ongoing, but definitely still open. And I doubt it'll be one of those things that's solved. I think anybody that probably had anything to do with it is now retired, dead, and moved on. But definitely a great look at it from this point, King. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts on this.
Hey, Hollywood, man, I appreciate it too, and I think that this one really checks all the boxes for
Yeah.
crime and entertainment, and it's been my pleasure to be on your show. Awesome show once again, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please share this because it's a unique perspective on this.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm Hollywood Wade. That was King of Connecticut. And unfortunately, we are out of time. Tune in next week for an all new episode of Crime and Entertainment. King, see you, my friend.
Yeah.